Hey everybody, welcome back. We're here now with Chapter 2, Lawmaking, how a bill becomes a law. Now I think for most of you this is probably going to be a repeat of your civics and economics class, and if it is, that's great. But we're going to go through this just basic sort of a PowerPoint. It's very short, I promise you, shorter than Chapter 1. So how does a bill become a law? Well, it comes at least from the federal government through the U.S. Congress, which comes from the U.S. Constitution. And we know that the U.S. Congress, primary creator of laws for the United States, has two branches of government, or two houses in there, the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. The U.S. House of Representatives, there are 435 total members. There are actually there are actually extra delegates in there from like Puerto Rico, from Guam, from the Virgin Islands, but they do not have from the U.S. District of Columbia or Washington, D.C. They don't vote. So 435 voting members. Know that the members of the House of Representatives are elected for 2-year terms, and each state gets its number of representatives based on its population, and those are changed every 10 years after the census is taken. Currently, North Carolina has 13 representatives from our state. The largest state, California, has 53. So those can change every year, every 10 years, based on how many representatives each state gets with its population. The U.S. Senate, on the other hand, has 100 members. They are elected for 6-year terms. Roughly 1/3 of the senators are elected every 2 years. With the House of Representatives, all 435 members are elected every 2 years. The Senate, only 1/3, okay, or thereabouts 1/3. Each state is going to be allotted 2 senators, so each state in the House, in the U.S. Senate, is equal in the House of Representatives. It is a population, so size matters in the House, equality in the Senate, okay? And so there we go. Now there are other things that within that, such as the House of Representatives only, bills that deal with money, bills that deal with revenue must start in the House of Reps, and the U.S. Senate has to approve all like trade deals and treaty kinds of things. So there's a few different things that each branch can do, but for the most part they are there, or House can do, they are there to make laws for the U.S. So what do? They pass statutes. The word statute is just another word for laws, okay? And they're the general statutes. We have statutes of the U.S., we have North Carolina statutes. Locally, they're called ordinances. So Lincoln County passes ordinances, not statutes. For the U.S. Congress, what they pass affects every state and every person. My PowerPoint, I apologize, says in use. It should say in U.S. So everybody in the United States is affected by these laws, whether they're a U.S. citizen or not. Anyone living in this country or visiting this country for any point in time are affected by our laws. Typically, the U.S. Congress is going to deal with issues affecting national or federal concerns, things that are not really within a state's realm. Things such as national environmental quality, defending our country, homeland defense, national security are there. Things dealing with labor issues, labor relations, veterans affairs, public health, civil rights, economic development, postal services, and federal taxes. You know, if we think about labor relations, the UAW, United Auto Workers, they're across multiple states, and so they're going to work through labor relations. We had the case back earlier in 2016 that dealt with the NCAA and players. Can they form unions? Do they get paid? That's something that eventually Congress will probably have to deal with. Veterans Affairs, the VA, how do we take care of our veterans? How do we take care of the people who have served our country in the military? Public health, right now, currently, we're looking at Zika down in Florida. Does the United States government, how do we fund Zika research? How do we fund groups trying to combat Zika? Do we do that through the CDC? Well, that's one way. The National Institutes of Health, the Department of Public Health, or subsets of that will be in there. Civil rights, we look at the Civil Rights Amendments, okay, and voting rights. Economic development through trade deals. The Postal Service is federal taxes, federal income taxes are part of that. State legislatures are going to deal with more localized issues, things that are important to that state. In general, each state has a similar government, a similar legislative branch to what the United States government has. A few states will have different. I think Nebraska has a unicameral House. So that there are a few that are different, but for the most part, they're the same. They may call them different things, but North Carolina calls ours the General Assembly. But we have a House of Representatives and we have a Senate within that General Assembly. But they each have a state legislature. Each of those legislatures, just like the U.S. Congress, is there to pass statutes, pass laws for the state, but it only affects people in that particular state. North Carolina, for instance, can't create a law, cannot pass a statute or a law that affects someone in South Carolina, okay? Unless that person in South Carolina is coming into North Carolina to do business here or to visit here. So if you're in a state, you are bound by that state's laws. That's how, if you travel to South Carolina to Carowinds and you're speeding, that's how the South Carolina State Trooper can give you a ticket for violating the speed limit. Okay? You are bound to follow their laws and obey their laws, just like people coming into North Carolina are. If there are things that will affect interstate commerce, so if you're driving from North Carolina to Georgia, and different states have different requirements for trucks, the U.S. Congress would then step in and try to resolve that issue. That way you don't have to have 3 different trucks or a truck that is so hard, it's so hard to manage the truck or to get the truck set up for 3 different states. The U.S. government would do things that deal with interstate commerce, interstate trade. But within that state, each state gets to set their own things. And so things that they deal with, state taxes, education, traffic, marriage, and divorce. North Carolina, we have taxes. Do we tax the lottery? North Carolina has a lottery system. Do we charge taxes on lottery tickets? Yes or no? We have a state sales tax. What's our sales tax going to be set at? North Carolina, it's a little bit lower than some states, higher than others. Education. You guys are under the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Under the DPI is Lincoln County Schools, okay, and our Board of Education. North Carolina gets to set what courses you take, when you take these classes, what you have to do to prove that you pass these classes. They just recently changed the grading scale from a 7-point scale to a 10-point scale. That's a state law, not a national law. Now, U.S. Congress can pass incentives for states to do things with education. And I know you hear a lot about Common Core in the news right now. A few years ago, it would have been a lot about No Child Left Behind. Well, those are national laws dealing with education, but states could effectively tell the government to sod off, to leave, because the federal government cannot force a state to do something. Now, how the federal government gets states to do things is it pays the states. They attach rules that if you want federal money for stuff, then you have to do what we tell you to do on education. And North Carolina sometimes will do that. The state passed rules on traffic, on marriage, and on divorce. Now, I know recently we've had, same-sex marriage has been an issue within the state legislature, and the voters of North Carolina passed a constitutional amendment to North Carolina's constitution saying that marriage was between one man and one woman, and then the U.S. court system struck it down. Okay, not the U.S. Congress, but the U.S. court struck it down as having violated Americans' 14th Amendment rights, or equal rights, okay? They're civil rights. And also how you set up divorce. Those things are set up in the state legislatures. There are limits on power, okay? The U.S. Congress can only make laws that the U.S. Constitution specifically grants them power, okay? Now, I know it seems like the U.S. Congress does a lot, but they interpret the Constitution to say, well, I think the Constitution means I can do this. If you look at Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, it's going to list exactly what the U.S. Congress can do. They can regulate interstate trade. They get to set national defense. North Carolina doesn't get to set national defense priorities. That's the U.S. government's right. The U.S. Congress gets to coin money, which is why a few years ago when states were talking about, we're going to create our own currency, they can't do that. Okay, legally, they don't have the responsibility. They don't have the right to do that. That's only something the U.S. Congress can do. States, on the other hand, have a much broader power. Okay, and found in the 9th and 10th Amendment are protections for the states. Okay, they have a lot more things they can do. They have a lot more power with their citizens. And the idea was to have a restricted U.S. Congress. Now, over the years, we've seen Congress taking more and more on and doing more. And in general, states have allowed that to happen. There's nobody really been arguing that. There are times when federal law and state law conflict. And if it's an area where the federal law has the privilege to act, the federal law will override state laws. Okay? And we find that in the Supremacy Clause of Article 1, which basically says the federal law, the federal constitution, is supreme to state laws, to state constitutions. That's a hard pill to swallow sometimes. And it was under the Supremacy Clause in Article and Amendment 14 that the federal court system and the Supreme Court was able to overturn North Carolina's constitutional amendment banning gay marriage. Okay, or really not banning gay marriage, but recognizing marriage as only between one man and one woman. That there was, I guess, a legal split, a legal difference there. They said that the Supremacy Clause says when multiple states have laws that are different from each other, the federal government has to step in direct to create order out of chaos. And because marriage is a right, is a civil right that every person has, a state that bans that right is in violation of the 14th Amendment. And because the U.S. Constitution supersedes, is more important, takes precedent over a state constitution, we are going to strike down that amendment that North Carolina passed. And that's sort of the logical process that went behind that. You can agree or disagree at another time. This is, we're not going to have that discussion, but that's sort of what they're doing. Okay, so how a bill becomes law. Now, I know you've listened to the Schoolhouse Rock video. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. Okay, I'm not going to sing for you. You would probably not like that much. But we're going to watch this quick video. Well, I say quick, about 7-minute video here on how a bill becomes law. I may stop it a little bit early. But here we go. Quickly, in a more detailed manner here, befitting a law and justice class, how a bill becomes a law. And you notice it's going to be a crash course.
Let's suppose that you're writing a really important email to a colleague.
This episode of Crash Course is brought to you by Squarespace.
Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Crash Course Government and Politics. And today, I've got my work cut out for me because I'm going to try to do something that every single social studies teacher in the U.S. has tried to do, even though there's a perfectly good cartoon you could just show. It's from the 70s. It's catchy. It's fun. That's right. Today we're going to learn how a bill becomes a law, but we're not going to be able to license the Schoolhouse Rock song. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a... You know what has a bill? An eagle. Okay, I think the only way we're going to possibly be able to compete with Schoolhouse Rock is to jump right into the thought bubble with our own cartoon, and to stop talking about Schoolhouse Rock. So let's start at the very beginning, which in this case is a congressman or a senator introducing a bill. The real beginning is when he or she has an idea for a law, and even this might come from an interest group, the executive branch, or even the constituents. But the formal process begins with the legislator introducing the bill. After its introduction, the bill is referred to a committee. Although most bills can start in either house, except for revenue bills, which must start in the House, let's imagine that our bill starts in the Senate because it's easier. Congress has the power to make rules concerning the armed forces, so let's say this is a bill about naming helicopters. Anywho, this bill would be referred to the Senate Armed Services Committee, which would then write up the bill in formal legal language, or markup, and vote on it. If the markup wins a majority in the committee, it moves to the floor of the full Senate for consideration. The Senate decides the rules for debate, how long the debate will go on, and whether or not there will be amendments. An open rule allows for amendments, and a closed rule does not. Open rules make it much less likely for bills to pass because opponents of the bill can add clauses that will make it hard for the bill's proponents to vote for. If opponents of our helicopter name bill were to add a clause repealing the Affordable Care Act or something, some supporters of the bill probably wouldn't vote for it. If a bill wins the majority of votes in the Senate, it moves on to the House. Thanks, Thought Bubble. We're going to have to go the rest of the way without fancy animation. But I could sing it. I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to use a funny voice. The Senate version of the bill is sent to the House. The House has an extra step in that all bills, before they go out to the floor of the House, must go to the Rules Committee, which reports it out to the House. If a bill receives the majority of votes in the House, 238 or more to be exact, it passes. Yay! Now, this is important. The exact same bill has to pass both houses before it can go to the president. This almost never happens, though. Usually the second house to get the bill will want to make some changes to it, and if this happens, it will go to a conference committee, which is made up of members of both houses. The conference committee attempts to reconcile both versions of the bill and come up with a new version, sometimes called a compromise bill. Okay, so if the conference committee reaches a compromise, it then sends the bill back to both houses for a new vote. If it passes, then it's sent to the president. And then the president signs the bill, boom, done. That's the only option. Oh, no, there's two other options, actually. Option 2 is for him to veto the bill. And we've gone through all of this for nothing. The third option is only available at the end of a congressional term. If the president neither signs nor vetoes a bill, and then in the next 10 days Congress goes out of session, the bill does not become a law. This is called a pocket veto, and is only used when the president doesn't want a law to pass, but for political reasons doesn't want to veto it either. Congress can avoid this altogether by passing bills and giving them to the president before that 10-day period. If the president neither signs nor vetoes a law and Congress remains in session for more than 10 days, the bill becomes a law without the president's signature. So that's the basic process, but there is one wrinkle, or if you want to be all Madisonian about it, check on the president's power. If Congress really wanted a bill and the president has vetoed it, they can override the veto if it gets a 2/3 majority in both houses on a second vote. Then the bill becomes a law over the president's signature. Oh, snap! This is really rare, but it does happen once in a great while. The Taft-Hartley Act of 1953 passed over Truman's veto. I like to call it the Tartley Act. Shorten it. It's a portmanteau. It doesn't happen that often because if the president knows that 2/3 of the congressmen supported the bill, he won't veto it. And if Congress knows that they don't have 2/3 support, they won't try to override the veto. Nobody wants to try something and fail in public, right? Except for me, obviously, if you look at my other YouTube channel, Wheezy Waiter. So there you have it, how a bill becomes a law. I'll admit the process is a little cumbersome, but it's designed that way so that we don't get a lot of stupid or dangerous laws. Still, this doesn't quite explain why so few laws get passed. Bills have a very high mortality rate, and it's way more common for a bill not to become a law than to become one. The main reason is that there's...
Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there. That got the key gist of it. I mean, if you want to watch this rest of the video, it's Crash Course U.S. Government and Politics, How a Bill Becomes a Law. Or you can just go to get the good Schoolhouse Rock and do I'm Just a Bill, right? So anyway, that's how the basic process of how a bill becomes a law. Very truncated, very shortened process of a process that's not simple at all. There are other ways that laws and regulations are made in the U.S. And the vast majority of the rules and regulations that we have to follow do not actually go through Congress, okay? They're what we call bureaucratic law or executive agency law, okay? And these things come from the executive branch of government. Let's say Congress passes a law that says we want the air to be clean, to have no toxins in the air by 2050, okay? So, was it going to be 34 years from now, 34 years from now, 34 years from now, the airs are going to be clean and free from all toxins and pollutants in the air. Well, Congress, most of the time, in these laws, does not actually sit down and plan out how that's going to work. What they do is they say, boom, you've got a job to do, okay? They look at the executive branch, which is in charge of carrying out these rules, these laws, and says, it's your job. You do it. And so groups, and we would say the Department of Interior, probably, the EPA, would get this, law from Congress saying you must have no toxins in the air by 2050. And what they have to do is they have to determine what are we going to do to do this, okay? How are we going to make this law effective? What standards, what rules, what mechanisms are we going to use? How are we going to enforce this? And this is where legislation actually occurs. Think of Obamacare as one, okay? And that's an example that's easy to think of. Congress passed a law that says everyone is going to be insured by health care. Okay, if you're not, you're going to have fines, and we're going to do this under our taxing authority under the Commerce Clause, which is what the courts eventually said that they did. Well, the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, sat down and said, well, these are how we're going to create the exchanges. This is the website that we're going to use. These are the procedures. This is the date that you have to be signed up. This is the date you have to have proof of insurance. This is what it means to be a full-time employee or a part-time employee. They created all those laws, okay, and they created all that other legislation underneath the umbrella of the Affordable Care Act, or what we today popularly call Obamacare. Please note I just said popularly call, okay? It doesn't mean that the law is popular, though I think polling information at the moment still shows that it is above 50%. When I say popularly called, it means the vast majority of people call it something. The other way two other ways that we have laws that are made. So we have agency laws, bureaucratic laws. Courts can make laws, okay? Courts will make decisions, and these decisions, generally by appellate courts, will set precedent and are followed by other courts. So what does it mean to have a reasonable suspicion for a search warrant? What does it mean to have reasonable cause? What standards do you have? What standards rise to meet, what standards do we set for issues violating free speech, violating your personal privacy? How do we set these standards? Those are created by courts. And appellate courts will say that was an unreasonable search because you did not meet A, Y, and G. And so because of that, you can't do it. To be a reasonable search, you have to have B, D, and E. And if you don't have B, D, and E, it's not a reasonable search. Okay? And so we get those things. And that's courts. We also have international laws. The United States is bound by treaties and agreements. We have NAFTA. We have the new Pacific Agreement that we're working through. We're also through the United Nations. We have treaties and NATO and how we behave with each other and work with each other. And these are ways in which laws are made for the United States. I hope that helped a little bit on Chapter 2. And we are going to call it in. I'll talk to you again in Chapter 3. See you later.